Welcome to this biblical site of the Upper Room. We are just outside Old City Jerusalem in what's today called Mount Zion. What is really fascinating about this place is this place marks out undoubtedly the place of the Upper Room, okay? What is really amazing, and I'm excited to share with you, is that at the base of this building right here are ancient stones. Right now it's a synagogue, and right now the tomb of David is there. It's just an empty casket. But at the front of it, there is this niche, like this small apse that was a Torah niche. And it faces where? Golgotha, which is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. This building was built between 70 and about 100 AD. So Jerusalem is destroyed. Then the Christians afterward, they're going to build this church here, because the Upper Room is going to be destroyed. So they're going to now build and mark out where this Upper Room was. But they're going to make a Judeo-Christian-like church or synagogue. At the base, when we go in here, I'm going to be showing you the base. Now, what's up above this stuff? This is Crusader. Okay, we're going to go first into the lower part and show you the foundations of the first church. The church from about 70 to 100 AD when it was built. We're going to see ancient stones. We're going to see the wall of it. It's amazing, okay, just to think about this, okay? And then afterward, we're going to be going up into the Upper Room from the Crusader period. I'm going to be talking with you about different layers of archaeology that we can see, wherein we know that this marks out the Upper Room. And then when the Upper Room was destroyed, in 70 AD in the Jerusalem destruction, then the Christians come back and they rebuild this, and they build a church, synagogue church. Then later the Byzantines are going to build a bigger one over it, and then later the Crusaders as well. So we have archaeology of buildings going back to about 70 AD. Unbelievable. And most importantly, we're going to experience the events in the Bible that happened right here. Your faith will be greatly strengthened as we ponder these monumental, life-changing things. So are you ready to explore this? Now, taking into account the original Upper Room, let's look at the 6 layers of archaeological evidence affirming this site. These layers have been identified by recent archaeologists like Pierotti from 1859, Pinkerfield from the 1950s, and Begatti and Avi-Yonah in recent years. As this site was researched and excavated, the conclusion reached is that this was a Judeo-Christian synagogue church dating from around 70 to 100 AD. Additionally, many eyewitnesses like Eusebius in 318 AD, the Pilgrim of Bordeaux in 333 AD, and others confirm that there were churches here and that this is the authentic place of the Upper Room. There were also discovered on the original plastered walls of the first church writings that say, "Conquer, O Savior, mercy," and "O Jesus, that I may live." These clearly connect Christians to this site from its beginning. So let's look at these layers. It's amazing to see them. The original Upper Room was destroyed in 70 AD. Soon afterward, Christians rebuilt a Judeo-Christian synagogue church over the exact spot. The Torah niche and the massive stones at the base of some of these walls can still be seen today. Also, at the base of this niche, also known as a Torah ark, you can see large stones from the first church. Now, as we've mentioned, what's really amazing about this first church is the direction it is pointing. The Torah niche, also known as a Torah ark, is where the Torah was kept. It was like a large cabinet. These and the layout of the synagogues they were in always faced the temple. However, this one doesn't. It points directly to Golgotha, the place Jesus was crucified, buried, and rose again. This shows that these early Christians were venerating Golgotha over the temple. That's because of what Jesus did at Golgotha. Also, every succeeding church built at this site will face the same direction, towards Golgotha. Now, where is Golgotha? Today, it's the location of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which has overwhelming evidence as the authentic Golgotha. Sometime later, the original building was expanded and called the Church of the Apostles. Around 382 AD, the Byzantines built a large octagon-shaped church next to the Church of the Apostles. A mosaic in the Church of Santa Punaziana, dating to around 400 AD, show both the first synagogue church and the Byzantine churches. In around 415 AD, the octagonal church was replaced by a much larger church called the Hagia Sion Basilica. It was built beside the original synagogue church. These two churches can be found on the oldest map of the Holy Land called the Madaba map in Jordan. It dates to around 550 AD. Later, the Byzantine church was destroyed by the Persians in around 614 AD. The church was soon rebuilt and then destroyed by the Muslims in 1009 AD. And after being rebuilt again, it was destroyed in 1110 AD. In 1219 AD, the Crusaders built another church, incorporating the original foundations of the synagogue church into the overall building. The upper room building was transformed into a mosque by the Ottomans in 1524 AD. On the south wall, a prayer niche or niche directed toward the Islamic cities of Mecca and Medina is embedded. Stained glass windows from this period are also found on the south wall. Today, the State of Israel Ministry of the Interior currently manages the upper room building. These layers of history show that this is the authentic site of the upper room. There's no doubt about it. So you are in the very place where monumental events took place. We're going to go in now. We're going to go into the synagogue. That's where the foundations of this ancient first church are. We're going to go in there and look at that. It's a synagogue now because they put the tomb of David there. The original tomb was in the city of David. They just moved it up here believing that this is where it's at, but it's not accurate. The Bible says very clearly that David was buried in the city of David. We're on Mount Zion. We're a long ways from the city of David, but it's a synagogue. So the men are going to go to the right side. The women are going to go to the left side. We're all going to be able to see the niche. The men are going to need to have a hat. It's a synagogue. So we're going to go in there first and we're going to look at this. Then we're going to provide more explanation. Let's go ahead now and go in here to this synagogue. So I'm going to provide just a little explanation. So we're going to go ahead and come on in. Toda, thank you. I want you all to come here first. Everyone come here, please. Women stay over there. Okay. But what I want to give you is some orientation to this building. This lower part of this building faced this way. There's a wall over here. It faced this way. Okay. So this is the lower floor of this first church. Okay. So the ladies are going to go that way. You'll be able to see the Torah ark niche. And then the men are going to go this way. Okay. So you ready, men? Okay. Want to be respectful. I'll talk quietly. Okay, we want to get this right here. This right here is the foundation wall of the first church, dating to about 70 to 100 AD. Okay, this is the wall right here. This is ancient stone right here. Okay, this is ancient stone. See this? This is the Torah niche. Okay. This is the tomb of David, but it's just empty. All right. This is a synagogue now, but it was way back when it was the first church. So you can see right here the Torah niche. Now, what's fascinating about all of this, which way does this direction face? We're going to get up on top of it here shortly. This faces right towards Golgotha, right toward the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is today. But before the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, when this was built, it was Golgotha. So this tells us also where Golgotha is. So absolutely unbelievable. Now this here is newer stuff. Some of this is going to be Crusader. But this stuff right here, this is the original wall of this church. 2,000 years old almost. This lower stuff, this is original. So this is absolutely amazing. I'm so excited to be here. And of course, once again, the church faced this way, faced Golgotha. It did not face the Temple Mount. So what's that telling you? Telling you that this now is facing Christ, where he died, was crucified, buried, and rose again. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Just soak it in. Right here is where early Christians met. Right here. So the first church. First church right here. That's where they would meet. Now they would meet on the Temple Mount, but in 70 AD, what happens? Destroyed. Jerusalem is destroyed. And then later on, we'll talk about it. Then the Byzantines built over this and enlarged it, and they had an octagonal building out in front of this. Then the Crusaders as well. They're marking out where the upper room was. So it was built right where the upper room was. Now today, the upper room is up above us. So where we're going now is the upper room from the Crusader period, and you'll be able to see it very clearly. Okay, so they built an actual upper room, but it's not the original upper room because the original upper room got destroyed. So then this is built to mark out the upper room, but they don't have a second story to it. But then the Crusaders do put a second story to it. Okay, well, let's head out now. We're going to go up to this upper room. Once again, it's going to be right over this. So again, the church is facing this way here. You got your orientation, you're facing this way. Then for the ladies' side, you can see over here, right? You can see ancient stones down here, these lower ones. As mentioned, the synagogue is divided into a men's and women's section. We'll take a moment to show the women's side. As you enter the main area, you can see the apse and part of the tomb of David. there's also a division wall, this partition wall out of wood that separates the men's from the women's section. However, you can see right over it into the men's section. Okay, well now let's go outside and we're going to go to the upper room, which is right above this. It's the room that the Crusaders built. We're going to go right through here. There's two accesses. We're going to do this access. So now we're going into the upper room, but this upper room was built by the Crusaders. Okay, so the layers we have is the first church down below, then the Byzantines come, they build a church over it, then the Crusaders come and they build a church over it, and then they build this upper story up here. Now let me just tell you, let me just set this up. Once again, this is not the original, but it is in the exact spot. This is the exact spot of the upper room. Because right in here, then this is built right over this first church that was built in about 70 to 100 AD, right in there. So after Jerusalem is destroyed, then the Christians come and they build this to preserve the upper room. So this is the exact same spot of the upper room. Stones and going back to about 70 to 100 AD. You're not going to find much more getting close to an actual event than right here. You ready to go in? Okay, let's go on in. Now this is not technically a church, so we don't have to worry about our hats or anything. So you can tell that this is from the Crusader period. You can tell by the arches. The Crusaders then built over what the Byzantines had built over, and the Byzantines built over what the first Christians had built over. So we have layers going back in time that tell us this is the exact spot of the upper room. Now this is Crusader once again, but this is the exact spot of the upper room. Now, the upper room could have been bigger than this. We don't know exactly the size of the upper room, but we know that after Christ ascended back to heaven, that they were meeting, and we know that at least 120 were here, right? So we know that there was at least 120. And it appears, we'll be talking about this later, but it appears then that the early Christians would meet here, the core group would meet here then for some period of time. And so now, let's talk about what we see up here. We have Crusader remains up here. This is, once again, the Crusaders built this. We have here a model of this tree, olive tree symbolizing the Garden of Gethsemane, grapes symbolizing the cup of wine, and wheat symbolizing the bread. Okay, so this right here is commemorating Gethsemane. We have on this side over here, now after the Crusaders, what group of people do we have? Before the Crusaders and afterwards, we have Muslims. The Muslims now say, okay, we are telling you that we're now in control. So this niche right here is a Muslim niche. And which way do those normally face? Towards Mecca. Now on the south wall, you can see there are two stained glass windows. These are from the Ottoman Muslim period, dating to around 1524 AD. There are also Muslim writings, plaques and stuff on some of the other walls as well. Now there is something very interesting on this column over here from the Crusader period. It shows a group of 3 pelicans sculpted into the stone. In this scene, a mother bird with its babies are standing on her left and right. and they are picking at her heart, eating her flesh, and drinking her blood. This symbolizes Jesus and his sacrifice at the Last Supper, as found in Matthew 26:27. And when he had taken a cup and given thanks, he said to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant, which is being poured out for the forgiveness of many." There are also stairs leading from this upper room level down to the lower level where the synagogue is, to the original floor of the first church. So now let's talk about some events from the Bible that took place here at this upper room. Absolutely amazing. After Christ ascended back to heaven, the disciples went to the upper room, which was most likely where they were living while they were in Jerusalem. It says in Acts 1:13, and when they had entered, they went up to the upper room. So this is right after Christ's ascension back to heaven. It says, and when they had entered, they went up to the upper room where they were staying. Peter and John and James and Andrew, Philip and Thomas, Bartholomew and Matthew, James the son of Alphaeus, and Simon the Zealot, and Judas the son of James. All these with one accord were devoting themselves to prayer, together with the women, and Mary the mother of Jesus and his brothers. So not only are these key apostles, but then we have Jesus's mother Mary. Mary Magdalene would have been here. These key leaders are going to be right here in this upper room. And then the upper room is the most likely place then where Christ is going to appear to his disciples after his resurrection. It says in John 20, on the evening of that day, the first day of the week, the doors being locked where the disciples were for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood among them and said to them, "Peace be with you." That most likely happened right here, because once again, this upper room is going to be the key meeting place of the disciples and the small body of believers right after Christ returned to heaven. And then it's very likely, very probable then that the upper room is where Matthias was chosen to replace Judas, who betrayed Christ. It says in Acts 1:15, in those days, Peter stood up among the brothers. The company of persons was in all about 120, and said, brothers, the scripture had to be fulfilled, which the Holy Spirit spoke beforehand by the mouth of David concerning Judas, who became a guide to those who arrested Jesus. And they cast lots for them, and the lot fell on Matthias, and he was numbered with the 11 apostles. So Matthias then fulfilled Judas's place. So where did Jesus celebrate the Last Supper? In the upper room. Once again, this is not the original, but it's built right over the original spot. So right here is where Jesus would celebrate the Passover. Then from here, he would go to the Garden of Gethsemane, be arrested, go to the house of Caiaphas, then go before Pontius Pilate, be crucified, go to Golgotha. So it says Jesus ate the Passover with his disciples here. It says in Luke 22:11, and tell the master of the house, the teacher says to you, where is the guest room that I may eat the Passover with my disciples? And he will show you a large upper room furnished. Prepare it there. And they went out and found it just as he had told them, and they prepared the Passover. What else happened here? Then afterwards, the early Christians would meet here, and then they chose a disciple here. So we have many events happening in this upper room. Most likely, the upper room was the home or the room of a wealthy man who then lent this room to the early believers, probably a believer. Now, some believe that the upper room is the place where Pentecost happened. We're going to be talking more about this tomorrow, but the best evidence shows that it wasn't in the upper room where Pentecost happened. I don't want to disappoint you, Just want to be biblical, and I'll tell you a little bit of the reasons why. But let's read what it says here. In Acts 2, when the day of Pentecost does come, it says, when the day of Pentecost arrived, they were all together in one place. And suddenly there came from heaven a sound like a mighty rushing wind, and it filled the entire house where they were sitting. So the text doesn't say it was the upper room, it says a house. This Hebrew word for house means the house, referring to the house, which all throughout the Old Testament referred to the temple. Jesus said, my house will be called a house of prayer. Also, the Hebrew word for house here is a structure, a covering. It's not talking about a necessary room. It's a covered, like a pavilion area. And on top of the Temple Mount, where we'll be tomorrow, at the southern end of that was a large covered pavilion. And we'll be seeing where that would have been. So once again, it doesn't say that it was the upper room. Also, when this fire came down and Peter preached, how many got saved? 3,000 got saved and were baptized. So for 3,000 to be saved, a crowd of at least 30,000 and likely up to 100,000 people would have assembled. The Jewish historian Josephus and others estimate that hundreds of thousands of Jews gathered in Jerusalem during the Holy Feast. Additionally, it says in Acts 2:6 that there was a multitude that came together. This large multitude could not fit in or around the upper room. The upper room could only accommodate about 150 people. The massive crowd that gathered and the 3,000 baptized could not have fit here or in the area around it. This area up here was in a densely populated residential area with buildings going up and narrow streets. So logically, you couldn't get 30,000 people up here. They couldn't see Peter preaching because we got narrow streets and all this residential houses. Also, there would be no reason for 30,000 people just to be up here. This was Pentecost, one of the major Jewish feasts. And so it happened at what time in the morning? 9. The apostles were accused of being drunk. Peter says, we're not drunk, it's 9 in the morning. What happened at 9 in the morning? That was the hour of prayers on the Temple Mount. And any obedient Jew would be on the Temple Mount for these times of prayer. That's where the Jews would be gathered. That's where the crowd is. It's Pentecost. They're just not going to be up here. It's very unlikely. Also, then, we know that they were 3,000 were saved, then they were baptized right away. Where's all the baptismals? Where's all the mikvahs? Not up here. They are down around the temple. And at the southern stairs, there's 50 mikvahs down there. There was the Bethesda pools. There was the pool of Israel. There was just massive amount of water where they could get baptized. Up here, there's nothing. The southern part of the Temple Mount would have been the natural place for Pentecost to occur, as it was the center of public activities in Jerusalem. It had major accesses going up to it on the southern end of the Temple Mount. The Temple Mount and Royal Stoa area could easily have handled the large crowd of 30 to 100,000 gathered at Pentecost. The Temple Mount platform was the only place in Jerusalem that could have accommodated a multitude of 30,000 to 100,000 people. It was the size of 35 professional football fields, big enough to handle over 150,000 people. Therefore, we believe the Temple Mount platform is the best candidate for where Pentecost happened, and most specifically around the southern part of it by the Royal Stoa. Let's step this way a little bit because others are going to come in. I want to talk to you now, since we have this nice time here, I want to talk to you about the Passover, the Last Supper that was celebrated right here. Okay, so Jesus with his disciples celebrated the Passover meal here. It's called Seder, here in the upper room. And it was here then that Jesus would wash his disciples' feet. So what is the meaning of Passover? We know that Passover goes back to the time when the Israelites were going to come out of Egypt. It was the last night that they spent in Egypt as slaves. And the Passover was where they would kill a lamb, and then they would take the blood from that lamb and they would put it on the doorpost of their homes. And then when the angel of death came and they saw the blood, it would pass over. So Passover is to literally pass over it. We're not going to do anything bad here. We're going to pass over this place because the blood of the lamb, their sacrificial lamb, was on the doorpost. And then that night they would leave in haste. Early in the morning that night, they were going to leave in haste because the people, all of the firstborn in Egypt, from the male to all the firstborn and even the animals, would die. So then the Egyptians would plead for the Israelites to leave, and they do. And so that's Passover. So now in the New Testament, then Passover is fulfilled in Christ. And it's right here, right in this area, not on this floor, because this is rebuilt, right? But you're standing on the very approximate same level wherein Christ would institute the new covenant. Unbelievable, monumental shift. Okay, now Christ is our sacrificial lamb, and he shed his blood for us on Passover. And so now because of him, now God passes over our sin. So he fulfills all of that, and he institutes the new covenant so that now we're no longer under the sacrificial system of the Old Testament. All of that is now fulfilled. Christ said, I didn't come to abolish, but to fulfill. So he fulfills it all, and so now he is our Passover lamb. So that monumental new covenant switch happens right here. Christ is right here with his disciples celebrating this. So let's read a little bit about this event. Jesus began the Passover by washing his disciples' feet, and he would show us the kind of attitude he wants us to have. So it says in John 13:1, now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. So from here, Jesus would go to the Garden of Gethsemane to be arrested. That's why we call it the Last Supper. This is the last meal Jesus is going to have before his death with his disciples. During supper, when the devil had already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going back to God, rose from supper. He laid aside his outer garments, and taking a towel, tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was wrapped around him. So right here is where this event's going to happen. And at this event, Jesus is going to teach us a monumental truth about servanthood. So it says in John 13:12, when he had washed their feet and put on his outer garments and resumed his place, he said to them, do you understand what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you should also do just as I have done to you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. So Jesus, being Lord and teacher, is now going to wash their feet. Totally opposite of what kings and rulers do. Kings and rulers in the natural realm, their feet are washed. They are served. Jesus does just the opposite. He is going to serve. And washing someone's feet was pretty gross, really, because they would be dusty, they would be dirty. Who knows what they stepped in? I mean, it was agriculture, all kinds of stuff. So to wash someone's feet was really an act of servanthood. They would hire slaves and people to do that. So Jesus would do that. Then, of course, right here then, he's going to institute the new covenant. It says in Matthew 26:26, "Now as they were eating, Jesus took bread, and after blessing it, broke it, and gave it to the disciples, and said, 'Take, eat, this is my body.'" We celebrate communion in our churches, right? Where does that imagery come from? Where does that custom come from? That ritual come from? Right here. So take the bread, eat it, for it's my body. And he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink of it, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will not drink again of this fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." So takes the bread and then takes the cup. Now, what is the meaning of the bread? The bread represents Christ's body, which was broken and crucified for our sin. It speaks of the bread that was made without leaven for the rapid departure of the Israelites out of Egypt. It also represents the utter dependence that the Jews had, the Israelites had, upon the manna, the bread that God would feed them. So when they wandered in the desert for 40 years, God gave them manna 6 days a week. Without that, they would have died. So when Jesus talks about himself being the bread and the bread of life, to the Jewish mind, it's like, wow, he is our living manna, so to speak. He is the bread of life. That's why Jesus would say that man doesn't live on bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. All of that imagery is going back to the Old Testament, of which Christ is fulfilling. Once again, we've talked about it earlier. If you don't understand the Old Testament, then the New Testament will plummet in your understanding, in being able to mine and appreciate its riches. So be students of the Old Testament. Dedicate yourself to the Old Testament. I read the Old Testament once a year. The whole thing. I read the New Testament twice a year. Be students of the Old Testament. Don't bypass when you get to the middle of Exodus and we start getting into the tabernacle and all that. Don't bypass that. It's all there for a reason. When God wrote his word and he inspired it, every word is inspired. God carefully chose which words were going to be in the Bible, because he could have had a master, 20-volume set, which is just impractical. So we had to really think through and condense things so that what is there is very important. So when he gets into describing the tabernacle and the sacrificial system, he's not just filling pages to make your life boring to read it. Got to read it. Why? Because there are deep truths tucked in there that allow you to really realize God is a God of order. How does a sinful creation communicate with a holy God? Because now these people are God's chosen people, holy, and so now how are they going to interface with that? So the whole sacrificial system, the tabernacle, all of that then is there to show us that when Christ fulfills all this, then we appreciate it more. The whole tabernacle and temple, we are now the temple. So don't bypass the Old Testament. And of course, then Christ would refer to himself as the bread of life repeatedly. Why? Because he was life. He also referred to himself as living water. You can't exist without water and bread. So what's the meaning of the cup? The cup represents the blood of Christ that was shed on the cross for payment and forgiveness of our sins. So in the same way that the sacrificial lamb was slain and they put the blood on the doorpost, now Christ is slain, and now he is our Passover, once for all Passover lamb. There is also wedding imagery in the cup. When husbands and wives got married, then the cup would be an affirmation of vows being fulfilled. So also the cup represents us now being married to Christ. We're now married to him, bonded to Christ now. So the cup has that imagery as well. So when we receive the cup, we are affirming our commitment to Christ. So all of this happens here. Last Supper, where all of this takes place, the institution of the new covenant, Jesus washing the disciples' feet, and then also then this place right here would be the place where the early church would meet. This is where Matthias, the new apostle, would be chosen. This is where they would be praying. This would be their kind of residence, so to speak, when they're in Jerusalem. So you're on holy ground, all right? And it's also the believed place where then Christ would appear to his disciples on one occasion after his resurrection. Okay, well now let's do something special. We're going to go up above this upper room to the rooftop where there's a lookout spot. From there, we'll see some sights and get an overview of the layout of the upper room and how it relates to Jerusalem. So now let's go up on top here. We're going to go up some stairs and we're going to go up on top of that platform and get a bird's eye view of everything. Everyone get on this rail here. Okay, let's point out some sights and enjoy this amazing view. First of all, let's locate the Temple Mount. It's just to the right or northeast a bit of us. Okay, now let's locate the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which was Golgotha. It's directly in front of us to the north. Now, which way does this upper room building face? We can see it points directly at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. As we've indicated, the early Christians built this Judeo-Christian church synagogue to venerate Golgotha, where Christ was crucified, buried, and rose again. Amazing. Now, synagogues always face the temple, so for this to face Golgotha was a deliberate decision to venerate Golgotha and set it aside. Golgotha was the most important site for these early Christians. They didn't forget where it was and guarded and protected it right after Christ's ascension to heaven. Now, this large building to our left is the Abbey of the Dormition. According to Catholic tradition, it marks the place where Mary fell into a deep sleep before her ascension to heaven. That's what they believe. Next, we can see the Mount of Olives to our right or northeast. Amazing things happen there. This is where Jesus will return back in power and great glory with us with him, and he will touch down, the mountain will split in two, he will judge the nations. Amazing things are going to happen there. It's just a special time to be up here. Just think about it. Take in all these sights and think about the history of this place and how these early Christians marked out these holy sites to venerate and remember what Jesus did for them and to preserve them for future Christians to see. You are standing on at least 4 layers of churches that were built here to commemorate this site. It's absolutely amazing to think about it. Thanks to them, we can do the same today. So just soak it in and think about all that happened in this area and what Christ did for you. Amazing, again, just to be here and to experience this and just to witness all of the places and all the things that took place here. And just to think also, once again, that right here is where then these early Christians would gather and meet and all these major events would take place. Incredible. So thank you, and may God richly bless you.